Hi, Katelyn. It is lovely to speak with you, and we're so excited to have you perform on the Kotzschmar Organ. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the program that you're going to be playing for us this weekend.
Sure, it's such a pleasure to be here with you, James. And also, I have to say that we're recording this on your birthday. So it's a special privilege to be here with you this evening, that you're taking your time to do this. And, you know, it shows true service to the cause of music making and music sharing. So it's extra fun for that. So we've entitled this program Heroes and Heroines. And when I was invited, actually kind of invited back to the Kotzschmar, since we had last summer's program be canceled because of COVID, like so many programs, we completely changed the recital program and put it on Mother's Day weekend. So it's the Friday of Mother's Day weekend. So I find that sometimes it can be really difficult to put together a program for a specific holiday, because you really want to speak to anybody where they are and whatever topics they kind of need to hear at the time. So for some people, Mother's Day is a happy occasion. For some people, it can be a little bit of a more bittersweet occasion, or it's exceptionally complicated because we are complicated human beings. So I put together some music that I very much enjoy and that I think could be very easily linked to the Mother's Day holiday. Some music that my mother and grandmother both very much enjoy. So I am very excited to share with everybody who will be there some music composed by a Canadian composer, a Belgian composer, French, and we'll kind of travel the globe in this program. So we include a little nod to the sacred, and we have a piece that's based on the Avemar Stella chant, which is Mary Star of the Sea. And it's a beautiful improvisation, actually, not by me, but actually by a early 20th century organist, Charles Tournemire, who was quite renowned for his improvisation. So we'll get to hear a little bit of that early 20th century Parisian improvisatory style. But we do open with a piece by a living composer that was only composed about 15 or 16 years ago, Rachel Laurent, who is a Quebecois composer, absolutely wonderful person as well as a fabulous composer. And she composed this spectacular étude héroïque, heroic etude, that really dances across the keys and the pedal board. So it can be fun to watch, just as much fun to watch as it is to listen to.
That's fantastic. How did you find out about Rachel's music? I mean, she's a wonderful composer, as you say, and I think one of the really the major voices in organ music of today. I would love to know how you came across her music and found this piece in particular.
Spectacularly, Rachel is very well known, as you say. So I actually came across this particular piece probably almost a decade ago. Isabelle Demers, who's of course professor at Baylor University, made this piece extremely well known with her spectacular performance, which can be listened to on YouTube. And her virtuosity is quite extraordinary. And then I, picked up the score probably around 10 years ago when I first heard of the piece, looked at it and said, gosh, that's too difficult for me. So it was great fun to come back maybe 5 years later and rediscover the piece and say, well, maybe I could actually play it. And I actually have brought it back this time. I haven't played it in 5 years. So it's great fun to kind of come back with a bang, as it were, as we're coming out of COVID and, having great fun on the Kotzschmar instrument. So
that's awesome. So you have a long association with the Kotzschmar organ, partly because you grew up here, and we like to call you a local girl, which I'm definitely not, neither a girl nor local. but what was it about the Kotzschmar organ? What does that mean to you in terms of your upbringing and your professional development and your success as a soloist now?
What's extraordinary about the Kotzschmar is that it figures in so many different walks of life for people in Portland and throughout New England. It's one of course, 2 instruments in the country that has a municipal organist, a city organist. So not only is it an instrument of a concert hall or an instrument of a church, but it is an instrument of the city and an instrument of the heart of the city. So I was very fortunate to study, of course, with your predecessor, Ray Cornells. He was my teacher for 4 years while I was in high school. And I also had the privilege of playing flute in the Portland Youth Symphony Orchestra. So we, of course, shared the stage with the Kotzschmar. And so as a student of Ray's, I occasionally had the privilege of playing that instrument, and especially for the times when he would bring in, and I don't know the context of this necessarily because I actually wasn't a local Portland student. I was a York student, right? Little farm town, almost in New Hampshire. But I had the privilege of coming and playing when he would bring local high schools, local middle schools in to hear the instrument and to hear Kotzschmar Jr. and to kind of see the innards of this gigantic beast that we are so lucky to know about and to play and to hear. So I was so just so touched by the fact that this was a part of the community, and it just speaks to the fact that not only music, but also organ music can speak to people from all walks of life. And Merrill Auditorium, the Kotzschmar Organ, Ray, and you continue this legacy and continue reaffirming its relevancy to everything, to the power, to the grandeur, to the quiet, to the tranquility that this instrument has to offer, and that all organs have to offer in such unique manners. So it helped me to find my path, but it also helps others to just appreciate music, appreciate art, culture, and humanity in a grander form.
That's wonderful. I should just say to the listeners out there, I'm not in Merrill Auditorium. I am in my home. But you can see the organ kind of behind me there, a little bit of it. And most of the organ is there that you can see behind the stage, but also some of it is right above where my head would be, with what we call the antiphonal and the echo divisions. And there are about 1,300 pipes that are right above the ceiling. Is there anything in the program, well, more specifically, did you obviously, you cater the program to the organ and the sounds, but is there anything in particular that you were really looking forward to revisiting in terms of the colors and the textures and things?
The strings of the Kotzschmar are pretty unique and very, very unforgettable. So I always enjoy exploring what I can do. I don't know how many pairs of strings there are on this instrument, but I would say probably maybe at least half a dozen, if not a dozen.
Yeah. So just to be clear, there are no violinists inside this orchestra. There are no strings like this, but there are pipes that sound like the string instruments of an orchestra. And I think in this instrument, they really sound like you are in the middle of the any of the great symphony orchestras of our time. It's very realistic, but all of the pipes are made out of metal, and they work like regular organ pipes, but sound like string instruments.
Absolutely. And what's very cool about string instruments is that string pipes on the organ is that they're actually a little bit mistuned. So they sound like a lot of violins playing together that might be a microtone out of tune. So you get this kind of effect of a whole ensemble playing at the same time. Now, of course, you get that with the organ anyway, but these are pipes that are made to do that in a very unique way. So there's a piece that I'm playing on Friday evening, Chanson de Matin, which ironically was not composed by a French composer, but actually by an English composer, Edward Elgar. And this is one of two pieces that were composed actually to get a little money in pocket around the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. I think it was published in 1899. And so I'm playing one of these two pieces. It's called Song of the Morning is the English translation. So this actually was composed originally for violin and piano, but then Elgar himself transcribed it for orchestra. So what I've done is I've taken a transcription by another organist actually of the 20th century for the organ. And then I've kind of made it into the orchestral version, but still played on the organ. And that's specifically done for the Kotzschmar because it is such an orchestral instrument. So we get to hear a little bit of the clarinets, the oboe, these string stops, these diapason, these warm sounds that surround everybody, and maybe a little bit of the harp that the Kotzschmar has.
So tell us about that, because we talked about the strings and the Kotzschmar organ has all the other kind of sounds you would expect from a pipe organ, the principals and the reeds and the mixtures and flutes and things. But you mentioned the harp there. Are you using any of our toys in your pieces? I mean,
I'm using a few toys. I'm using a few toys, so we'll have a little bit of fun there as well. And what's extraordinary is that these toys, of course, aren't electronic. There isn't a speaker back there that's giving us these sounds. There are actually mechanical ways that a harp or something that can create a harp-like sound is being struck or being plucked in some way that we actually hear the resulting sound. When you hear a cymbal in the Kotzschmar organ, there is actually some kind of cymbal that is being mechanically hit, and it's quite extraordinary because we have so few instruments that have the space and the technology to be able to do this. So it's really very special.
That is awesome. So I'm going to zoom now across the Atlantic, because you've spent a long and very distinguished part of your career in Europe, in Germany and in France. And I wonder if you could tell us how you got from Maine to Germany and France, and how that's influenced your career where you are now.
Well, we'll go with the short story, shall we? Growing up in York, Maine, I applied to several different universities, and I actually ended up going to the same alma mater as Ray Cornell's graduated from. So I ended up going to Oberlin College and Conservatory. I received double bachelor's degrees from there, one in French and one in organ. And my very first semester at Oberlin, we had one of the titular organists, one of the main organists from the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, Olivier Latry. And I don't know if he's actually played in Portland before, but I think he was
He
also
has, yeah.
last summer, yeah.
And he was actually supposed to play in the same summer festival that you were when COVID came and destroyed everything.
So I'm sure he'll be back.
Yeah,
but he actually served as my very first university organ professor. He swapped positions with my teacher at the time. And so he came and taught, and I was already taking French lessons, which I had started at York High School. And then I completely fell in love with the language even more than I already had. And I walked straight into the Foreign Studies office at the end of my first semester at Oberlin. And I said, I want to get a Fulbright and study abroad. And they said, yes, you very precocious 18-year-old, please go back, study, do well in class, and come back and see us in 3 years. So thanks to their patience and coaching, I actually did apply for and was awarded a Fulbright to France. So I studied for a year in Toulouse at the conservatory there with Michel Buvard and Jan Willem Janssen. Now, Michel, of course, is a French teacher, and Jan Willem Janssen is actually a Dutchman. So I had a wonderful kind of ensemble of teachers at the time. And then I had the great privilege to come back and work at the Church of the Advent in Boston for 2 years. So also home ground, close to the family. And then just this last summer, received my master's degree from the Musikhochschule in Stuttgart, Germany. So I got to practice my consonants a little bit more, and to practice my Reger and Reibke and all of this wonderful repertoire to kind of fill in a little of the gaps of that Teutonic repertoire.
That's awesome. So you have a number of French pieces on this program, and I wondered if there's obviously a very strong part of France and the French language that lives in you, and I wonder if you see the Kotzschmar organ as a vehicle for that kind of French music, or if it's not directly. How do you make it sound like it's a French instrument? How do you make that work?
I love these kinds of questions. So every organ, James, as you know, is incredibly unique, and it speaks the language of, in a way, the organ builder, in a way, the language of the locality, the language of what it's going to need to be to serve the church or the municipal hall or the concert hall in which it's placed. When we look at the stop list of the organ, there are pipes, different stops that actually are named in different languages. We have, I think we have a flûte harmonique at the Kotzschmar organ, and then we have a concert flute, we have a clarabelle, we have pipes that are named from around the world, which is quite extraordinary and quite fun. What's really even more exciting as an organist is to go through and to listen when we're familiar with the pipes that actually came from those countries, when we've traveled to those countries and heard the original, as it were, flûte harmonique or something like this, to listen to it and say, interesting, this one has a bit of an American accent. So how can we change the accent of this pipe, but perhaps by adding a little bit of a harmonic something or other, a little bit of a different tone to the vowel of the instrument, so O versus U, to make it sound a little bit more local. Now, we also want to make the Kotzschmar sound like the Kotzschmar. So it's really striking a balance, and this is a very subjective thing, but striking a balance between a national style and also a local style, and something that will hopefully speak to both me as a player and people who are listening in the audience. Now, one can never please everybody, and one will never be able to match everybody's subjective ear. But as long as you can take everybody on a ride, we can all have a good time.
That's awesome. And we really are going on a fantastic ride. I was looking at the program just before we started talking, and I noticed especially the Sonata Eroica, which is the final piece, which, as you mentioned at the beginning, is a wonderful and slightly curious piece in terms of what that a sonata implies a very sort of standard sort of keyboard form, and it's very much not, but it's very heroic. And of course, you start with the Etude Heroica, with the sort of the Greek versus the Latin form of that heroic word. But I wonder if you could tell us about the central piece, which I think is the Florence Price Sonata, a little bit about her and about that piece and why you came to choose it.
Absolutely. So I had never before performed a piece by Florence Price and never had learned one before, but it seems she's the hot composer of the year. And I had heard a colleague of ours, Joshua Stafford, actually perform this sonata and thought it was very interesting and really I wanted to learn it. And he kindly sent me a copy of the score. So I got to have a look at it. So as I understand it, she's actually from Little Rock, Arkansas. And then she came up and at the age of 15 began studying at the New England Conservatory in Boston. So we can take a little ownership of her because of that. And she was an African American composer, and a lot of her projects, concerts, and compositions were funded by African American groups in Boston. At a really extraordinary time, this particular sonata was published in 1927. She, overcame so many challenges. She moved back to Little Rock. Her husband was a lawyer, and they left because of the incredible problems that were being had there because of race. And then she eventually moved to Chicago and became quite well known. So in a way, I have a little parallel with her because, of course, I'm from Boston and currently living just south of Chicago. But it's an extraordinary story, Florence Price's, because of overcoming just the reality of what she was born into, and finding her way of making music throughout it all. It's a wonderful example for all of us to follow in a way.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And this piece is interesting because it parodies, in a sense. So that's a geeky musical term, when people sort of pay homage to another piece. And it really parodies the Gilmore. So Alexandre Gilmore was an organist a French organist, sort of very famous in the 19th century, came and toured America several times. I don't think he got all the way up to Maine. It was probably too cold for his French feet, but he certainly got up to Boston and had an organ school in New York City, and it parodies his organ sonata, his D minor organ sonata. And I wonder if you would speak to that idea of the sort of the Anglo-American French confluence of ideas and how they flowed from one to the other. We have a piece by Maurice Duruflé, well, the reconstructed piece, and he, of course, played many times in New York City and across the United States. And Marcel Dupré, one of his predecessors, used to wax lyrical about American organs and how they were so up to date. And so I wonder if you could speak to a little bit about that, having lived in the old world, as it were, and the new world, and what are the benefits of a European organ or a German organ or a French organ or an American electropneumatic organ? How does that all figure into your thinking?
I find it fascinating how we all live interesting lives of the grass is always greener on the other side, but I don't like change, so I don't want to deal with it. So it's an interesting combination of fearing and loving change and difference all at the same time. So everybody always wants to travel, especially as musicians. We grow so much through travel and through exposure to things that are unlike what we're used to. And Florence Price was absolutely no different to this. She actually was in a master class with Gilmore and actually played that D minor sonata for him.
Yeah.
And then wrote this sonata afterwards. And it's quite funny because I haven't played any Gilmore except for his second organ concerto. So this is in a way me learning Gilmore through not learning Gilmore. And I was learning it for the first time, and my husband, who listens to a ton of organ music, immediately goes, "What Gilmore are you learning?" "No, that's not Gilmore." And he got very confused by the piece. It was absolutely fabulous. But we're always taking these different influences. American organs tended to have a lot more bells and whistles, quite literally, at the Kotzschmar, and tended to have at least on the cutting edge, tended to be on the cutting edge of the technology of memory levels and all these easy ways to quickly change sounds. So Marcel Dupré came over and played the Wanamaker and improvised what became the Passion Symphony. We have these extraordinary stories of people who have international influences and kind of a meeting of multiple minds. So I think it's so important that we continue growing, not just through the music world, but through, we learn from each other in every aspect. And this Florence Price sonata is an excellent example of this. It certainly stands well as a musical example of its own, but if one is also familiar with the Gilmore, they can get a little extra chuckle out of a lot of the themes or the way that she structures things. So it's a wonderful combination of things. I don't actually know if she ever studied abroad, but my gosh, what an incredible international experience for both student and teacher at that time, to be able to play in a master class with somebody who came over from French at such an early time, 100 years ago. It's quite extraordinary.
It is, isn't it? It is quite extraordinary. And I often think with pipe organs that we are playing essentially every time we perform, it's a blast from the past, because the Kotzschmar organ sounded like it did in 1912 when it was first installed. I mean, things have been added to it, and as you say, the memory level. So those are the little buttons that you see. If you will see the console on the TV screen if you're watching us online, or if you're in person, you'll see these underneath the manuals. And so we can push these, and it suddenly brings up combinations of sounds that otherwise you'd have to have a plethora of people pulling out the stops, left and right. And there are 161 stops that take a lot of people a lot of the time, and they'd probably get it wrong. So it's transformational to have that technology, and it's fascinating how the organ has always been that sort of linchpin almost of technology and artistry kind of meeting in the middle, that we've needed to have the best of both worlds to make it work. I'd love you to tell our audience about your experience with the cavaïcol instruments you played. Certainly at the cathedral in Toulouse was one of his finest, if not the finest, extent cavaïcol with a big reed in the pedal. And so I'd love you to tell us what your experience was with those instruments in France.
What's truly extraordinary about the organ is that oftentimes, probably until the last perhaps 100 years, the organ and the town clock were the most technologically sophisticated machines in town. The town clock, of course, had to keep time. The organ was this thing that, would have mechanical blowers to put air into the pipes, and would have these incredibly difficult, complex things that I don't understand. I'll leave that to the organ builders so somebody could actually strike a key and cause wind to enter one particular pipe, as opposed to, the hundreds or thousands others that were there. So it's really great fun to go to places in the United States, but also go to Europe to play instruments that are kind of, as you say, these vestiges of history, these primary sources, as it were. So, for example, in the Tournemire that we'll hear on Friday evening, this fantasy improvisation, these were actually recorded in 1930 to 1932, and they were recorded for the French National Radio. And we can hear these original recordings. Now, of course, on these discs, the quality isn't necessarily very good. So what we're often playing from is a transcription, as you say, that was made by a student of Tournemire's, Maurice Duroflay, and he was listening to this very bad quality recording, I think probably 20 years later, because Tournemire had actually requested that nobody transcribe these pieces to be played for anybody else. So I hope Le Maître will forgive me. But what's so interesting about this is, of course, they were dealing, I can't recall off the top of my head, and I think it's a 72 millimeter disc, which has 4 minutes on each side. So this piece is 8 minutes long, and in the middle, they had to give him the high sign, and he had to hold a chord for a while, and then he lifted it so they could lift the disc and flip it to the other side. So we're dealing with mechanical things in the recording, but we're also dealing with mechanical things in the organ. So the way that these French instruments, particularly at the end of the 19th century, very beginning of the 20th century, were built, they were what we call symphonic organs, and they started imitating symphonic sounds, orchestral sounds, flutes, strings, as we've already talked about, clarinets, oboes, all of these wonderful, fabulous sounds, trumpets, etc. But what organists at the time were thinking was, oh, these instruments are getting so big, we need a way in order to quickly change sounds from the loudest to the softest. But they didn't have the amount of electricity that we have now, and they hadn't quite figured out a good way to do that. So one way that they did that was they separated out the stops, the really loud ones and the really soft ones. They separated them and put different wind to each of them. So the organist can control wind going to each of these pipes, because of course an organ pipe needs wind to blow, to sing. So we ended up as organists having these little ratchets that would go down that would actually give wind to the particular pipes that we had selected. So for this fantasy improvisation, the way that the sounds change are they're kind of tiered. So you start out with the softer sounds, and then you add the next level of the sound. You essentially add the wind to this next level of sound. So you'll be able to hear a little bit of that on Friday evening as I'm kind of changing the sounds instead of in a more orchestral way, as in adding one flute at a time, or maybe one violin at a time. I'll add kind of a rank of stops. If you think about like a rank of soldiers, I'll add a line of stops at a time. So you hear this kind of ratcheting up. The Kotzschmar is a truly orchestral instrument, so this can be quite subtle, but I'm trying to give us a little bit of the musical clunkiness that would have been what Turtemir was experiencing at the time. And when he would have flipped that 72 millimeter disc, I flipped my score. So we have a little bit of that.
That's awesome. So those of you who know these pieces, I think there are 4 improvisations that he made. There are 5. Sorry, stank.
2 of them are very short. They count as one.
Yeah. And you hear when you perform these pieces, as Katelyn's saying, about 4 minutes in, if you play it at the right tempo, then there's a very obvious pause. And I think it's wonderful. It's, as you say, that confluence of the sort of the fantastical, and this guy's making all this music up and it's just flowing forth. But then there's this sudden, halt to reality. Oh, wait, they've got to change the disc over. And so he just sort of pauses for a moment, suspends himself, and then gets going again. And it's wonderful to see. And that's so lovely that you're thinking about that and sort of integrating the theatre into your performance with the page turn. So we're all going to know when it will be. That's so cool. So I'd love to ask you, I'm going to be a little bit naughty here because this is supposed to be all about you. I'm going to ask you a little bit about your husband. We talked a little bit about this idea of knowing how organs work. And if you're a great organist, you really have to appreciate those things. And I think of not one of my teachers, but someone I had many masterclasses with, Dame Gillian Weir, who was a long time married to Lawrence Phelps, who's one of the great organ builders of North America in the 20th century. So tell us a little bit about Dave. And I should say to our viewers that my wife Emily and I and our son Noah were very, very privileged to go to Dave and Katelyn's wedding at the Church of the Advent in Boston, probably a couple of years ago now. Tell us about Dave and how that influences your performance and practice and everything else. Sorry, Dave.
He's downstairs. So what's so useful sometimes is, how fate works out. When not only do you dovetail as human beings and in the personal, but also in the professional. So Dave and I dovetail extremely well, and we're both very proud of that, and we're both impressed that it ever happens. But so my husband is actually an organ builder in his own right, which always makes us either very popular or very unpopular at parties. I haven't yet figured that out. But he's actually Australian, and he grew up near Sydney, and then he already knew what he wanted to do because his father is also an organ builder. So he's a 2nd generation organ builder. And so he already was dreaming of being an organ builder and ended up having his apprenticeship because they have structured apprenticeships in organ building in Australia. And upon completing his apprenticeship, he actually was offered a job here in the United States to work for a company. And he is the foreman of the service department of Bizarre Organ Company out in Champaign, Illinois. So that's where we're currently based. So there he's working on restorations and service work, maintaining lots of instruments, historic instruments in the United States. It's quite extraordinary how many historic instruments we have that are really worthy of being maintained and still giving life and music to their congregations years and years later. But what's great fun, of course, is that he has had and has elected to have great exposure to organ music throughout his whole life. And I joke that he listens to more organ music than I do. So, I will suggest that he listen to certain kinds of music, and he will suggest that I add music to my repertoire. And there is a list, and I have barely scratched the surface. But what's great fun, actually, is that that we can kind of together overcome one of the greatest challenges of being an organist and an organ builder, which is I can play what he needs to hear to find out what he needs to do, and he can be my ears in the room, because often the organist has the worst seat in the house. We are oftentimes literally inside the instrument when we have pipes behind us, pipes in front of us. We have no idea what anybody downstairs is hearing. In the case of the Kotzschmar, a lot of the instrument does go above one's head. So in order to figure out exactly what is too loud, what is too soft, can you actually hear the pedal and all the fast notes that I'm playing, or is it not? While this is still subjective to an extent, having somebody with whom you share a kind of language and a way of listening is extremely useful. So I find that when I can bring him along to things, I can register a lot faster because I'm not having to record anything or play anything back. So it's much, much easier. That's
so cool. So we should all remember that J.S. Bach, for example, one of the great leaders of the organ world, was on a side gig, I suppose you would say, was an organ technician. So he would be hired to go out to whichever church had just installed a new organ, and he would write about it, sometimes very critically, the winding is a real problem here, or they didn't use the right wood here, or that, that window there that's going to let in all kinds of air, and it's going to, you know, destroy the pipes in a few, or the bellows in a few years. And so as organists, we're always thinking about these technical things, because, you know, you can't just sit down and start playing. You really need to know what's happening behind the facade pipes.
And
I think
sorry.
That's so wonderful. No. That is absolutely wonderful. And I think entirely unique in our field, that it's something we all dream of, having somebody, you know, who you are so connected with, who can say, you know what, you just need to play that slower, or that is just too loud.
I can't get involved with that yet.
Oh.
and you know, it's quite funny because we've only been married for 18 months. Our wedding was in September 2019. What's quite funny is, you know, I'll be playing a section and I'll say, what do you think of that registration? And he'll go, good. So yeah, 3 measures later, here's what you need to do. I'm not there yet. Stop that. I need 3 pistons before we get there. So it ends up, you know, we're working on the communication.
Excellent. That is so cool. But it's much better than having a teacher and you just say, oh yes, okay, and then just do your own thing.
Actually, it's very useful because we're of each other's world, but not in each other's world. So we're never in each other's way. And each of us is kind of our own specialist in a part of the field, and yet we're within the same field. So it really does, there's no competition. It's just great fun, really.
That's so cool. Well, I'm just so overwhelmed to speak with you, and it makes me so happy to think of this lineage that the Kotzschmar has provided you in terms of your career, which now, I mean, as you've seen the newspaper articles, I mean, Katelyns is truly an international performer and one of the greatest stars in our field and in the music field in general. And I wonder if you could say something to the next generation, so where you were, you know, 10, 15 years ago, what can you say, words of encouragement and guidance for them looking to become the next superstar in the organ world?
I think the most important things, and there are many of them, is to reach out and ask questions, because so many of us have been in a way wherever the next people are coming from, and we've had a different vantage point, and the world is different, but it isn't so different that getting a lot of different advice and ideas and brainstorming with different generations is not useful. I think it's really, really important to not give up because one person says no. In a way, I was just reading a book the other day about how one needs to collect no's, because there will be disappointments in a life that is trying to be successful and trying to push any kinds of boundaries, and to not give up because of a no, because the most successful people in the world have been told no a lot, and they've just kept trying and kept practicing and kept pushing. There is no one way to do something. I have a bit of an unusual path. I, did my bachelor's degree, waited 2 years, went on to a master's. A lot of people just go straight through the educational field. There is no one way, and just find people who might help you to find your own particular path, because your unique combination of skills and unique viewpoints and unique ideas can create your own career. So it just takes a little creativity and a few people who are in some kind of no, and there is no one kind of no. So just keep asking questions and keep being curious, and never let yourself be completely shut down just because one person says, maybe not.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely wonderful. Never accept no for an answer. Fantastic. Well, Katelyn, this has been such a joy. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy practice schedule. You've sort of moved your family east for this past week, and you're spending these many hours in the, as I say, the Merrill Auditorium right behind me, although I'm literally not there, getting reacquainted with this instrument. And I really cannot wait to hear the concert in person. And all of you, if you are able to join us online, you can view, go to our website, portix.com, I think, or .org. We'll put that in the link below. But certainly foco.org, which is foko.org. You can find out all about Katelyn, all about her program, and all about how you can watch the program from the comfort of your living room or wherever you may have internet access. So Katelyn, thank you so much, and we're really looking forward to hearing you later in the week.
Thank you.